Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're tackling a really big American idea, maybe even a myth. The lone hero, the self-made person, that sort of lone cowboy image.
Right, or the genius inventor tinkering away all alone.
Exactly. And our source material today paints this really vivid picture. It talks about someone sitting in the smell of gunpowder and cheap beer, maybe thinking about, like, the lab assistants who never got their name on the Nobel plaque.
That's powerful imagery.
It is, isn't it? And it sets up this core question the piece asks: does America really have to save the world from tyranny all by ourselves? Is that the whole story?
It's a great question because that self-reliant image, it's just so baked into how we see ourselves. We love that picture, right? The hero standing alone. But the source immediately counters that. It imagines Macron maybe raising a glass saying, hey, don't forget our Navy helped you out back then.
Right. Or the ghost of a Soviet general, Zhukov, tapping his medals and saying, oh, excuse me, we lost more in one city. It kind of stops you in your tracks.
Exactly. It makes you pause.
And that's what this deep dive is all about. We're looking at this piece called A Declaration of Interdependence, what we forget when we remember ourselves. And the author makes a point of saying, look, this isn't about being anti-American. It's about being pro-honesty.
Which is a key distinction.
Yeah. It's arguing for a more maybe grown-up patriotism, one that can handle the full cast list, as the author puts it, even the surprising names.
So the idea is, sure, independence is precious, absolutely. But the piece argues we tend to forget we didn't do it alone. So our mission for you today, listening in, is really to unpack these historical examples the author uses, the arguments they make. We want to give you maybe a fresh look at some history you think you know really well.
Yeah.
Help you see that full cast list.
Yeah, moving beyond the highlight reel to the whole production.
Exactly, a richer picture.
Okay, so if we're challenging this lone hero myth, the obvious starting point has to be the American Revolution, right? The ultimate we did it ourselves story.
You'd think so. But the source digs into the French contribution, which was massive.
How massive are we talking?
Well, think about Yorktown, 1781. You had Admiral de Grasse's French fleet. They didn't just help, they outnumbered the British Navy there. They blockaded Cornwallis, completely trapped him. That was pretty much the nail in the coffin.
Okay, so decisive naval power.
Absolutely. And on land, you had Rochambeau's French troops fighting right beside Washington's men. It wasn't just symbolic support.
And it goes beyond just military might, doesn't it? The source talks about the philosophy, the ideas.
Oh, completely.
Yeah.
Benjamin Franklin spent ages in Paris. The source pictures him slouching around Versailles, making deals for loans with French royalty who, frankly, just couldn't stand the English.
Huh, right. Strange bedfellows.
And the piece argues that the whole spirit we borrowed, the Enlightenment ideals, liberty, equality, fraternity, that stuff had a heavy French accent. It became part of our national DNA, as the source puts it.
So the intellectual borrowing was huge.
Yeah, Jefferson, Adams, they looked up to thinkers like Voltaire more than any English lords. And then there's the practical stuff, that ragtag colonial army we picture. They were often using fine French powder, sailing ships bought with borrowed credit.
Borrowed credit, not just from France.
The source mentions Dutch bankers chipping in, even support from Spanish Louisiana. It was quite the international effort, really.
And we even have that big, obvious reminder standing in New York Harbor.
The Statue of Liberty, a gift from France, yeah. Commemorating those shared ideals. It's kind of hiding in plain sight, that interdependence.
Okay, so the revolution wasn't quite a solo act. Now let's jump forward. World War II. The source says we memory hold the Soviets harder than anyone. That's a strong way to put it.
It is strong, but the numbers are just staggering. The estimates are around 20 million Soviet deaths. Some go as high as 27 million.
20 million. It's hard to even comprehend.
It really is. And think about just one battle, Stalingrad. Combined casualties, Axis and Soviet, were around 2 million in one city.
Wow. Okay, so how does acknowledging that kind of sacrifice change how we should view the war overall?
Well, it fundamentally shifts the strategic picture. The source puts it bluntly. The meat grinder of the Eastern Front made D-Day possible.
Because Stalingrad happened before D-Day.
Exactly. That brutal attritional warfare tied up huge amounts of German resources, manpower, everything. It bled the Nazi war machine significantly before the Allies landed in Normandy.
So it's not about downplaying the U.S. role.
Not at all. It's not about diminishing the American contribution in Europe or the Pacific, which was obviously immense. It's about seeing, as the source says, how big the whole bloody theater was. It asks you, when you picture Normandy's beaches, to also see the smoke of Stalingrad and Kursk.
Right. Same enemy, same global conflict.
Same planet, yeah. It just widens the lens considerably.
And you mentioned other allies, too, the British.
Crucial for air defense, holding the line early on. And Lend-Lease, that big American aid program. It wasn't just a one-way street. Aid and resources flowed in multiple directions among the allies.
So again, it's about seeing the whole picture, the shared effort, the shared sacrifice.
Exactly. And what's interesting is how the source argues this isn't just about those two huge wars.
Yeah.
It sees a pattern.
A pattern of forgetting our helpers.
Yeah, or treating foreign help like a shameful second cousin, as the piece puts it. We focus on the heroic solo image, the cowboy hats, the Marlboro Man.
But we don't talk about the hidden stockpiles of foreign cash or the borrowed ships or the intelligence that helped us out.
Precisely. It suggests we polish that solo myth until it blinds us to the support structure.
Can you give some other examples the source brings up?
Sure. The Civil War, we think of it as purely domestic, but European powers were involved, thinking about recognizing the Confederacy for cotton diplomacy.
Mm-hmm.
And crucially, the Union's naval blockade, which was vital for victory, was financed heavily by foreign loans.
Okay, so international finance played a role even then. What about World War I?
Well, the U.S. joined late. The British and French had already been locked in horrific trench warfare for years, suffering unimaginable losses. America's entry was decisive, yes, but it came after years of grinding stalemate fought primarily by others.
Right, building on their sacrifices.
And it continues, the source argues, into more recent history. The Cold War, think about the CIA arming Afghan mujahideen against the Soviets. That's interdependence, even if it's proxy warfare.
Or modern conflicts.
Yeah, Iraq coalition forces, NATO interventions. These are almost always multinational efforts, even if the U.S. plays the leading role. The idea that no country does it completely alone seems obvious, but the source argues, we love to polish the myth until it gleams solo.
The piece also mentions some less comfortable examples of help. Roaches under every floorboard is the phrase used.
It's a provocative phrase, yeah. It points to things like Hessian mercenaries during the Revolution, some of whom were apparently turned by bribes, or the German scientists acquired after World War II to boost our rocket program, Werner von Braun and his team.
Right, Operation Paperclip.
Exactly. And then there are the really uncomfortable ones, like relying on native scouts and then effectively erasing their contribution, or the role of Mexican cavalry in shaping border conflicts.
Yeah.
It's a messy, complicated history of assistance.
It really makes you rethink the simple narratives. Which brings us to the big question the author asks, why? Why does any of this matter? Why care about these forgotten helpers?
And the answer provided is pretty stark. Because when you forget your helpers, you stop being worth helping.
Wow. That's direct.
It is. It suggests that acknowledging this interdependence isn't just about historical accuracy, though that's important. It has real-world implications for how we function as a nation today, how we relate to others.
So it's about fostering a more realistic view of our place in the world.
Exactly. Moving beyond a simplified, maybe even arrogant narrative to something more robust, more honest.
This connects back to that idea of adult American patriotism you mentioned earlier.
Right. The grown-up patriot, the source suggests, is someone who can handle the full cast list. Someone who understands that, yes, we did plenty. America achieved incredible things. But pretending we did everything alone is the real betrayal. That's the core argument. It's not diminishing the achievement. It's understanding its true complex foundation.
Which ultimately leads to a stronger, not weaker, sense of national identity, maybe?
Right.
One based on truth?
That's the idea. A more informed patriotism. One that sees the connections, the collaborations, the debts owed alongside the individual efforts.
Okay. So wrapping this up then, the big takeaway from this Declaration of Interdependence seems to be that two things can be true at once. American independence, ingenuity, grit, all that is real and precious. But it didn't happen in a vacuum. We didn't do it alone.
Precisely. And embracing that more complex, interdependent view, well, it doesn't just make for better history. It arguably makes for better foreign policy, better global citizenship, more humility maybe, more openness to collaboration.
Yeah. It's about recognizing reality. So, the final thought the source leaves us with, building on that lab assistant metaphor from the start. If you want to be that adult American, that grown-up patriot, just remember the lab was crowded.
And the world still is.
How does really internalizing that crowded lab, past and present, change how we should engage with the rest of the world today? Something for you to think about.